Finally, right? How to go in reverse. We have a graph. How do we write its equation, its f of x function, as a rational function, meaning a fractional function? Well, first of all, we need to include our asymptotes. We're going to do exactly what we've been doing all along. So we've got one asymptote here at, let's see, a vertical one at x equals -3. Well, if we've got an asymptote at x equals -3, it means that it's going to make our denominator 0. Well, where does it make our denominator 0? Well, to figure that out, we need to actually go in reverse, add the 3 to both sides, and that will give us an x plus 3 equals 0. So that's the factor that needs to go on the denominator from the vertical asymptote to make sure that the denominator equals 0 there. So we'll have a factor of x plus 3. The next thing that we want to go after is that whole that we've got. So we've got a whole at, let's see, that's at x equals 2. So again, what does that mean about the factor that we're going to have? Well, to figure out the factor that we're going to have, we'll start out by looking at x equals 2 and figuring out when that's going to equal 0. So we'll subtract 2 from both sides, and that will give us that x minus 2 equals 0 is going to be our factor that needs to be on the bottom. That's going to make our denominator 0 so that we end up with a whole. So we'll have an x minus 2 on the bottom as well. However, wholes are wholes because they canceled out. So if I have an x minus 2 factor on the bottom that's making the denominator 0, then it's just a vertical asymptote. To make sure it's a whole and that will cancel out, I need to also put the same factor on top. Okay. I'm getting closer and closer. The next thing I need to make sure is to make sure that I'm actually going to cross through and have an x-intercept that I want. That x-intercept that I have is at -1. So let's see, how do I make sure that I get an x-intercept at x equals -1? How do I do that? Well, remember, an x-intercept means that you had a y value of 0. So if you were looking at some kind of fraction, whatever's on top and whatever's on the bottom, you're talking about when the y value equals 0. Well, when does the y value equal 0? When the top equals 0, because you'll have 0 divided by anything is 0. So whatever this is, the x minus 1 needs to have a factor that's going to make your top equal to 0, so that it becomes an x-intercept. Well, how do you figure out what that value is going to be? Well, let's figure out how to make it 0. Well, add 1 to both sides, and that will give us that x plus 1 is our factor that needs to equal 0 to make sure that we end up with this x-intercept at -1. And again, where did we say it needs to go? On top. So we're going to have a factor of x plus 1 on top. Now, inadvertently, what we've done without really realizing it is that the degree on the top is an x squared, and the degree on the bottom is an x squared too. It means they have the same degree. What we also need to make sure is that we end up with the correct horizontal asymptote, which is a horizontal asymptote here at 1. Which means that the coefficients out in front of our leading terms need to reduce to a factor of 1. Well, the easiest way to do that is to make sure that they both have a 1 out in front. So that when we go to take the ratio to find the horizontal asymptotes, we end up with 1 over 1, which is 1, which is what we have on our graph. So this is going to be our equation for our function. Now, it doesn't actually need to be written like this, and I did want to be super thorough so that we understand if the horizontal asymptote isn't 1, how we would do it. So what would I actually type into MyMathLab? This is technically my answer, but what doesn't need to be written is those ones. We can re-hide those, and we're going to have an x plus 1 on top, an x minus 2 on the bottom, over an x plus 3 on the top, and an x minus 2 on the bottom. And I'm certainly okay with you leaving it like this. You can leave it as factored, or you can FOIL out the top. If you do FOIL out the top, it would be x squared minus x minus 2. FOILing out the bottom would actually get you x squared plus x minus 6. Either way is fine for me. They mean the same thing. They'll give you the correct holes, vertical asymptotes, horizontal asymptotes, and the correct x-intercept that fits that graph. So it's a lot of information to keep straight, but this is your correct answer in either form. And on a test, I would take either form. No matter if my MyMathLab marked it wrong, I would go back. I always go back and go through every answer that's marked incorrect, and I would go through it, and as long as they're equivalent, factored, or FOILed out, it doesn't matter. I would give you full credit and give you your points back. So don't get panicked if sometimes your test scores are a little bit lower than what you think, because MyMathLab can only understand one thing. It's either right or wrong. And if you accidentally type a space or a comma instead of a period or vice versa, it just marks it wrong. So kind of keep that in mind when you are getting your grades, and try not to panic and wait. I always go through each and every problem marked incorrect. However, it does usually take me a couple days to do that, and then I sometimes upward of a week, because I have multiple classes. So just give me the time and the energy to do that, and I always do. And it doesn't hurt to send me your scratch paper as well.